Hi, I've chosen to respond to questions 4 and 6 of the Tasmanian Law Reform Institute's issues paper, responding to the problem of recidivist drink drivers. Question 4 asks whether, if a problem-solving approach is adopted in Tasmania, whether it should apply pre-sentence or post-sentence. Question 6 asks, if it is post-sentence, should a court-mandated diversion order be used? I've argued that a post-sentence model should be used, and if it is implemented, a court-mandated diversion order should be used instead of a separate standalone option. My motivation for choosing my position, it comes from pragmatism. The framework of the legislative framework is largely in place. Post-sentence model has already been used in Tasmania in the drug court with some success. Even though there are different models being used in various jurisdictions, the Western Australia, New South Wales and New Zealand, for instance, use a pre-sentence model. The United States, at Tasmania, as I said, and the proposed drug court for Victoria are adopting a post-sentence model. The literature I've chosen is largely from law reform bodies and advisory councils who have been addressing the issues of therapeutic justice in their various jurisdictions, and there are some purely theoretical works that I've chosen. For instance, Bardowick, Theron and Henning, they have a paper entitled Therapeutic Justice and Recidivist Drink Drivers Irreconcilable, and I've chosen a few other just theoretical papers, and I've borrowed from them lightly just to discuss the underlying philosophies behind the position I've chosen and to support the arguments that I've used. One concern that has been raised in one of the New Zealand Law Reform Commission papers is the problem of net widening with suspended sentences. But this is dealt with quickly, as the Tasmanian Sentencing Advisory Council has recommended that suspended sentences in Tasmania be abolished, and it's also recommended that the court-mandated diversion order be extended to alcohol offenders as well as drug offenders. Another weakness in the post-sentence model that's been alleged is the lack of flexibility in punishing breaches of a treatment order. But again, this is solved by the court-mandated diversion order, which has a range of options that can be used to deal with an offender who has breached an order. They can have their supervision increased, they can have their obligations increased, or they can even have short periods of imprisonment imposed upon them, say for 2 or 3 days, and then be able to release back into the program and continue on. Public perception public perceptions of the leniency on crime is another important issue, and also the public perception on the swiftness of justice. And I think this leans in favour of a post-sentence model. As a pre-sentence model, it could be up to 2 years before a sentence is imposed if the person fails the treatment program, and also if the person successfully completes the program, they may serve no custodial sentence, and this may be seen as lenient on crime by victims and the wider public. But with the post-sentence model, the sentence is imposed swiftly, and the victims can see exactly what the person's been sentenced to. Even though they may have a custodial sentence that's not activated, they can still see what's before them and what it will be if the offender fails to be rehabilitated. This is also an advantage to the offender, who can see the exact obligations that are being imposed on him, and there isn't the risk of what they call over-punishment, where if the sentence is deferred, the offender may serve a period through the treatment program with several breaches, with several sanctions, and the actual sanctions and obligations that have been imposed becomes blurred, and also the offender may end up having a higher sanction imposed on them eventually than if they'd just not completed the treatment program at all and just gone straight to their custodial sentence. The sentencing model also aligns with Tasmanian Sentencing Advisory Council's recommendations. One, as I've said, to abolish suspended sentences, and as I said, but I'll just repeat again for clarity, to extend the CMD, court mandated diversion order, to deal with alcohol offences. The legislative changes, that's another argument for a pre-sentence model, but this becomes, this argument's diminished as the legislative changes required to implement a post-sentencing model in Tasmania are minimal. It just needs the recommendation of the Sentencing Council to be appropriated, and that is to extend the CMD to deal with alcohol offences. The legislation is already in place and is currently in use for the drug court. So that's a brief summation of my paper and the strategy I've used and the arguments for it. So enjoy the paper.